If you take a highly systematic, like binary thinking software engineer and just drop them straight into the messy, completely unpredictable world of dirt and living plants, what actually happens?
Well, they don't just grow a garden, that's for sure.
No, definitely not. They build like an open source manual for a bamboo orchid, and they are currently on part 834.
Which is just, I mean, it is the ultimate culture clash, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You have this mindset that is built entirely for the digital realm, a place where everything is ones and zeros, inputs and perfectly predictable outputs. And you force that mindset to grapple with the analog, fiercely organic chaos of biology.
Right, because a machine executes code perfectly, or it throws a very specific error that you can track down and fix.
Exactly. But a plant might just drop all its leaves because, I don't know, the wind changed direction on a Tuesday.
Right. And that tension, that exact culture clash, is exactly what we are unpacking today in this deep dive.
It is a fascinating dynamic to look into.
It really is. So we are looking at a single, highly specific blog post from qianmeng.org. And this was just published yesterday, actually, March 13th, 2026.
Fresh off the press.
Yeah. And the author, Ang, introduces himself in this very distinct way. He calls himself an old software plumber who spends his nights tinkering with free Libre in open source software.
Which is also known as FLACOS, for anyone who might not be familiar with that acronym.
Right, FLACOS. But the thing is, today's deep dive isn't about writing code at all. It's about his post titled Notes on Gardening, Part 834, My Experience with Bamboo Orchid, Arundina graminifolia.
Just the sheer volume there. I mean, part 834, that alone promises a uniquely methodical take on a hobby.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you are listening to this, whether you are, say, trying to master a complex new workflow at your job, or honestly just trying to keep a grocery store houseplant alive without it spontaneously combusting.
Which I am very guilty of, by the way.
Right. Well, Ang's method here fundamentally changes the math on how we approach learning anything new.
Yeah, it really strips away the intimidation factor and just replaces it with relentless observation.
Let's start with the subject of his observation, though. The orchids themselves.
Right. Because when most people think of orchids, they picture those incredibly finicky, super delicate plants. The ones that require, like, the exact humidity of a Costa Rican cloud forest just to survive in your living room.
Yeah, they have this notoriously intimidating aura around them. Everyone thinks they are impossible to keep alive.
So true. But why is that?
Well, the traditional orchids you're probably thinking of are mostly epiphytes.
Epiphytes, okay.
Yeah, meaning in the wild, they grow on the bark of trees up in the rainforest canopy. They pull moisture directly from the humid air around them.
Oh, wow. So they don't even grow in dirt.
Exactly. And that is why they are so intensely difficult to keep alive in a standard, dry, climate-controlled house.
That makes total sense. We basically live in deserts compared to a rainforest.
Right. So to keep them alive, they require highly specialized bark mixtures, very careful light filtering, and this incredibly specific watering regimen.
It sounds exhausting.
It is, but Ang reveals a highly specific pivot in his gardening journey here. He notes that he has had much better luck with terrestrial varieties of orchids, meaning ground orchids.
Why, he explains that his success actually started with the common ground orchid, which is botanically known as Spathoglatis plicata.
Yeah, and because he managed to stabilize that system, he's now moved on to evaluating a new specimen.
The bamboo orchid.
No.
Or Arundina graminifolia.
Exactly. And the shift from epiphytic to terrestrial orchids is a massive reduction in complexity.
Right, because terrestrial orchids just grow in the dirt like most standard plants do.
Yeah. Ang notes in his blog that given adequate full sunlight and occasional watering, these plants can survive with minimal care.
He even observes that they frequently thrive without any fertilizer at all, which is crazy for an orchid.
It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we look at this through his software plumber lens, his choice of plant makes perfect sense, right?
God.
Well, traditional tree-dwelling orchids are like setting up a highly complex local server environment.
Yeah.
You have to manually configure the humidity dependencies. You have to monitor the air circulation, perfectly balance the light filtering.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Right. If one single variable is off, the whole system just crashes. But these terrestrial ground orchids, they are essentially an entry-level plug-and-play programming language.
That is a great way to put it.
You don't need a complex environment. You just put it in the dirt, give it some sun, and it runs. So is this the ultimate hack for a beginner gardener looking for an affordable gateway into the notoriously difficult world of orchids?
What's fascinating here is how his criteria for a successful plant minimal care, affordable exploration perfectly aligns with that exact desire. The desire to gain knowledge without feeling totally overwhelmed.
Right, you want the quick win early on.
Exactly. It strips away the intimidating aura of traditional orchid care, presenting a highly logical entry point. When you are tackling a notoriously difficult field, finding a low barrier entry point is how you prevent beginner's paralysis.
Yeah, you don't want to get stuck on day one because your server crashed, or in this case, your plant died.
Right. He deliberately chose a low dependency environment. It allows him to learn the foundational logic of the system without being bogged down by constant catastrophic failures.
So he found the path of least resistance to achieve his desired output, which is a blooming plant.
Yes. But once a system is stable, an engineer doesn't just stop there.
No, they definitely don't. They try to scale it.
Exactly. And for Ang, scaling means propagation. He wants to replicate the bamboo orchid.
And this is where his background in software really starts to dictate his gardening techniques. And frankly, where his logic seems to just completely defy conventional gardening wisdom.
It does. The text outlines 2 specific propagation methods for the bamboo orchid. Based on his reading, Ang notes you can either propagate them by dividing the suckers or through seeds extracted from their pods.
And just for context for the listener, suckers are essentially new little plant shoots that grow directly out from the base or the root system of the parent plant.
Yeah, they're like little clones. And he mentions that his bamboo orchid has actually started to bloom, but he hasn't seen any seed pods form yet.
Right, he's waiting on the pods.
Correct. But he explicitly states in the post that he is much more keen on propagating the orchid from seeds rather than from the suckers.
And I have to push back on his logic here for a second.
Oh, why is that?
Because if you talk to almost any seasoned gardener, they will tell you that dividing suckers is infinitely faster and easier.
Well, yeah, that is definitely true.
Right. You already have a viable, functioning mini plant. You just separate it, put it in a new pot, and you're done. Growing an orchid from a microscopic seed can take years, and the failure rate is incredibly high.
It is very high, yeah.
So why on earth would an engineer, someone who usually optimizes for efficiency and speed, choose the hardest, slowest possible route?
Because you are thinking about the immediate output, getting a second plant as quickly as possible.
Right.
While Ang is thinking entirely about understanding the underlying architecture, look at his exact phrasing in the post. He writes that his primary goal is to, quote, observe the entire life cycle and take notes along the way.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because if we go back to the software analogy, dividing a sucker is essentially just duplicating a file. You hit copy and paste on the plant.
Exactly.
You get an exact functioning clone, but you didn't actually learn anything about how the root system was built or how the organism developed from scratch. Growing from seeds is like compiling the source code yourself.
Yes. Growing from seed is the biological equivalent of compiling the source code entirely from scratch.
And there's a real practical debugging element to that too, right?
How do you mean?
Well, if you just copy-paste a sucker and the new plant suddenly gets sick and dies, you might have no idea why.
That is true.
You didn't build it, you just inherited whatever hidden bugs or root rot were already lingering in the system. But if you grow it from a seed, you are forced to observe every single dependency from day one.
Right. You watch the root structure form, you monitor the soil biome, you track the exact sunlight requirements for germination.
Exactly. Which means when a bug, or I guess in this case a literal insect or a fungal infection occurs, you have the historical data to know exactly how to debug the plant.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is reinforced by the highly clinical project-based language he uses to describe this entirely natural process.
Yeah, his phrasing is wild.
It really is. He casually mentions in this post that he first spotted the bamboo orchid back in part 621, quote, many moons ago.
Many moons ago. I love that.
And he finally managed to obtain a specimen during the Chinese and Lunar New Year strictly for, and I quote again, evaluation purpose.
Evaluation purpose? I mean, it sounds like he is beta testing a new server rack, not planting a flower in his backyard.
He isn't just growing a plant. He is running an extended multi-year observation protocol.
Right. He spotted the variable in part 621, he acquired the hardware for evaluation, and now in part 834, he is basically waiting for it to compile so he can log the final results.
Which naturally brings us to the sheer scale of what we are looking at here.
Oh, the scale is unbelievable.
You just mentioned part 621 leading to part 834. That really forces us to zoom out and look at the broader landscape of qianmeng.org.
Because this single post about a bamboo orchid is just one tiny data point in a sprawling, just staggering architecture of documentation.
The volume of his archives is relentless. Looking at the sidebar of his site, Eng has been posting consistently since July of 2011.
Wow, 2011.
Yeah, and just to put some hard numbers to this, to show you the scale, in 2022, he published 730 posts.
730. Okay.
In 2023, another 730 posts. He hit 732 in 2024, and then 730 again in 2025.
That is exactly 2 posts every single day without fail for years.
Without fail.
And the variety of the topics is what really caught my eye. We're looking through his category tags, and the range is wildly eclectic.
It's all over the map.
He has dense technical notes on programming languages like Haskell, Python, Go, and Rust. He has deep networking analyses, where he is evaluating Wi-Fi 7 MediaTek modules.
But then right alongside those hardcore technical logs, the domain pivots sharply.
Yeah.
He has extensive betta fish spawn logs. He has massive sections dedicated to general fish keeping, to photography, to home improvement.
He even writes notes on dieting, specifically analyzing the scientific truth behind a supplement called icosapent ethyl.
Really?
Yeah. And he has an entire section for notes on meditation.
So what does this all mean? When an author publishes 834 detailed posts on gardening, 81 posts on the complexities of Haskell, and 207 posts on keeping fish.
Are these just the casual musings of a hobbyist, or are we basically looking at an open-source manual for a human brain?
This raises an important question. To understand the psychological mechanism behind this level of documentation, we have to look at his core ethos, the flow assess philosophy.
Right, free labor and open-source software.
Exactly. In his sidebar, under a section titled Do Support, he explicitly champions organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Free Software Foundation, the Tor Project, and Wikipedia.
All heavy hitters in the open-source world.
And he links out to his own profiles on GitHub, CPAN, and PyPI.
And for anyone listening who might not be deep into software development, things like GitHub, CPAN, and PyPI are essentially massive public libraries. They're where developers share their code, their scripts, and software packages entirely for free.
They are the backbone of the open source movement.
Absolutely.
And open source isn't just a licensing agreement. It is a methodology of radical transparency.
Right. It is the belief that knowledge should be freely accessible, and that complex problems are best solved when everyone can see the underlying code.
Yes. And Eng is taking that exact methodology and applying it to his entire life. He even has a standard disclaimer on the blog stating that all content is for informational purposes only and that he accepts no liability for any loss or damage incurred.
Wait, really? On a gardening blog?
Yes. It reads exactly like the standard MIT or GNU license you'd find attached to a piece of open source software.
So the boundaries completely dissolve for him. He is treating a biological organism like a bamboo orchid with the exact same modular framework he uses for evaluating functional programming.
Exactly. A terrestrial orchid, a betta fish spawning tank, a complex script in Rust. They were all just modules to be tinkered with, heavily documented step by step, and then pushed out to the public domain.
Which is actually a brilliant psychological tool for learning, when you think about it.
Oh, totally. Think about a language like Rust, for example.
Okay.
It is notoriously rigorous. It forces you to manually manage memory safety, and it has an incredibly steep learning curve that, frankly, punishes beginners. Learning Rust is intimidating.
Very intimidating.
Trying to keep a delicate orchid alive is also intimidating. But when you modularize your life into these daily, highly specific micro-evaluations, you effectively eliminate the ego from the process.
Right, because documenting failures as just raw data points totally removes the sting of failure. It changes your internal narrative.
Exactly.
It's no longer, oh, I'm a terrible gardener who killed my expensive orchid. It becomes, the plant failed to compile under these specific environmental variables. I have logged the soil moisture and sunlight hours, and I will adjust the parameters for the next evaluation.
Yes, that is exactly it. You aren't failing. You are just gathering data.
Yeah.
It transforms an overwhelming, chaotic world into a series of highly manageable variables. You can see this in how he handles the orchids. He started with the Spathoglottis plicata, he logged the successes, and then used that baseline data to graduate to the Arundina graminifolia.
Every single post just builds the repository.
Yep, step by step.
Which brings us entirely back to you, the listener, because there's a profoundly actionable takeaway here. regardless of what your actual interests or daily challenges are.
Absolutely.
You might be staring down a massive, terrifyingly complex new project at work. Or maybe you are just trying to learn a new language, pick up a musical instrument, or, I don't know, figure out why your tomato plants keep withering in the sun.
The plumber's mindset is universally applicable. If you treat your learning process like an open source project, if you commit to meticulous, step-by-step documentation of what works and what crashes, you remove the fear.
Right. You stop worrying about the final output and start paying deep attention to the architecture of the problem.
You start compiling the source code of your own life, one daily node at a time.
I love that. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, there is one final lingering detail from Eng's post that highlights the ultimate tension of this entire experiment.
Oh, right. It goes back to his desire to propagate the orchid from seeds.
Yes, Eng has his system perfectly in place. He is ready to document the entire life cycle of this bamboo orchid. He wants to observe every root, every stem, every variable from the ground up.
He is eager to get started.
He is eagerly waiting for his blooming plant to produce those seed pods so he can extract them, start his multi-year evaluation, and log the results. But nature hasn't provided the pods yet.
Right. Despite the 834 parts of documentation, despite the daily logs and the floss methodology, the plant is still a biological organism. It is operating on an unyielding evolutionary schedule.
It doesn't care about his blog schedule.
Not even a little bit.
Which leaves us with a provocative thought to mull over. When we systematically document our lives down to the exact day, cross-referencing our data and applying an engineer's logic to the natural world, do we actually gain any real control over the chaotic pace of nature?
Or, by acting as the ultimate open-source engineers of our own backyards, do we simply learn to become much more patient observers of a timeline we can never truly compile?